Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. This is titled Understanding Information Security and its Impact on the Digital Signage Industry. This webinar is hosted by Digital Signage Today and sponsored by Intuiface. My name is Bradley Cooper. I'm the editor of Digital Signage Today, and I will be moderating today's discussion with Jeffrey Besson, who is the CMO of Intuiface. Information security is a key component of every industry, but many digital signage vendors have yet to embrace it fully. This webinar will explain the world of information security, as well as review key certifications and provide guidelines of how best to proceed for both vendors and integrators alike. Please feel free to submit any questions during the webinar, because we will have a live Q&A immediately following the presentation. With that, I'll pass the mic off to Jeffrey.
Bradley, thank you very much for hosting this webinar. I'm very pleased to be here. I am not going to thank the attendees, and here's why. In the time of COVID, sheltering at home, socially distancing, eating dinner in the street, we need a little bit of sunshine in our lives, and nothing says sunshine like information security. So I know you're here to relax and just enjoy yourself, and so you're not doing me any favors. But hopefully, I can bring a little bit of sunshine to what might be considered a fairly dry topic. Certainly, it's a critically important topic, and I hope to impart some of that concern you should have, and maybe impart a little bit of interest as well, so we can tackle it together and do a nice job of it. Before I get started, I wanted to take a little bit of a poll, just so I can understand who you are. So Bradley, if you could throw up the 3 poll questions, just want to get a sense for who's here. Could change the material a little bit. So let me know who you are. It's coming in. It's like a telethon. We'll give you guys another couple of seconds. Just about. We have a couple more numbers. All right, Candace, I think we can go to, or Bradley, number 2. It's a good split. So we go to the second question, please. So this is interesting for me. If you're an enterprise, you're not selling CMSs, you're not installing CMSs, you're an enterprise, you're a consumer, you're deploying signage for yourself. How important for you is information security? Is it a must-have, critical, everybody's got to do it? It's a differentiator. You might choose one vendor over another, but it's a nice to have. You haven't really thought about it, you know, that kind of thing. Excellent. All right. Very interesting. So the majority of you, it's a must-have. Good. I think that's good. One more question, please, Bradley. If you're a CMS provider, or you're installing, maintaining, you know, you're dealing with CMSs, how far along are you in formalizing an approach to information security? I have a proposal in this webinar that maybe the digital signage industry is a little behind other industries, but I'm curious to know your perspective on information security. You haven't even really thought about it. You're already certified for something. You know, where are you in the spectrum? So that's also interesting to know. And again, it's a pretty big split. All right, Bradley, thank you. You can close that as well. Very good distribution. Thanks, everybody, for participating. You can now relax and enjoy yourself. It's all about information security. So, why are we here? Okay, we proposed this webinar. Why are we here? It has come to our attention here, at least at an Intuiface, that digital signage might be the last industry that has privacy concerns, but doesn't treat information security as a must-have. It's a nice-to-have. You cannot purchase an ERP application, change management, you know, for development. There really isn't a system out there managing financial information that doesn't have to already say something about information security. In digital signage, we don't really talk about it that much. It's the last bastion of everything's fine, we got you, you know, don't worry, information is protected, which is kind of crazy. Certainly, I think it's given the industry maybe a false sense of security because we've kind of gotten away with it. Historically, we weren't being asked by it, and maybe it's a little chicken and egg. If people don't believe the signage industry is well equipped to provide a good level of information security, you don't ask for it. You know, it's sort of the tide is low, all the boats are at the same level, and so that's what you do. But it's a false sense of security. If you haven't seen it, it's coming because the enterprises you're trying to sell to are themselves internally worried about information security. And it's more and more likely that those IT organizations are going to say, I am not opening up my secure infrastructure to run your insecure infrastructure. It's going to be a demand. You're not going to have a choice. We've gotten away with it, but eventually you're not going to have a choice. So if you're on the enterprise side, it's something you need to seriously consider. If you're on the software side, the CMS side, installing and integrating, you're going to have to worry about it. Don't take my word for it. You know, we have, for example, a lot of you must know Invitis. They are sort of the European-based experts on digital signage and out-of-home advertising, real experts in the industry. And they wrote about this earlier this year. And you can look at this slide as sort of a build. ISO 27001, which we're going to talk a lot about, is a standard for managing information. Today, information security management is done at a point product level. It's not like you have this big system managing all the different apps you're using to run your business. It tends to be system by system. Enterprises, as I said, are demanding that if you're going to plug in your point solution in our infrastructure, it needs to provide a level of information security. But CMSs are a weak link. They don't typically do a very good job of that. But they are storing and processing information. So do the math. If enterprise IT requires it and digital signage CMSs store it and process it, then enterprises are going to start looking for certified platforms because it's the only guarantee that it can be safely plugged in. So the industry is talking about this as well. It's not just us. And the question is, well, what exactly is it and how does one do it? So let's start by talking about what information security actually is. At the end of the day, it's about protecting information and mitigating information risks. Information, it could be print, could be electronic. It's the data, the information that you're bringing in from your customers or that you're managing for your own business, all of your intellectual property, all of your financials, all of that stuff needs to be protected, and you need a process in place to continually reassess the risks to make sure that you are agile and adjusting to a changing climate to prevent unauthorized access and misuse and destruction of the media, et cetera. This notion of reacting to risks is a big part of it because even if you have controls in place, if you don't monitor the controls and make sure that they continue to be effective when there are new viruses and phishing attacks and firewall concerns and web operating system problems, you need to continually make sure that you're adjusting to those changes. It is not, however, information security is not particular to any industry. It is industry independent. It's about information. There's nothing about information that makes it special for one industry to another. It just needs to be secured. And so the general notion of information security, it's not special to digital signage. There's no particular unique requirements. The good news is what the industry says about information security equally applies to our industry. There's no special nuance that we need to account for. There's a good way to summarize the notion of information security. What are the goals? What are you trying to ultimately achieve if implementing some sort of information security process? It's confidentiality, integrity, and availability, or CIA. And you're going to hear about that a lot. If you ever Google information security, you're going to hear about confidentiality, integrity, availability. Confidentiality is who's allowed to have access, to make sure that only authorized people have access to the material to which they are authorized, right? So this is about making sure information is private to those who shouldn't see it, but accessible to those who can. Integrity means that nobody's messing around with it, that it isn't fragile in some way, that it's always accurate, that it cannot be corrupted. And that isn't just maybe because of some malicious intent. It could just be you have some bad infrastructure set up and there's some corruption, right? Do you have the proper levels of redundancy, and are you checking to make sure that information is accurate? You know, if you have financials, you change a couple of numbers, that's not a lot of bits, but it completely changes the financial outlook, right? So integrity is making sure it's not corrupted, that it is accurate. And then finally, availability means that you can get it when you need it. And that could be like a service level agreement where when I want it, I can get it. That the system is not down, that it remains accessible, that it is not being hit by some sort of denial of service attack or what have you, that it can always be available. It's my information. I want to get it when I need it. So confidentiality, integrity, availability. In a nutshell, those are the objectives of information security. The question ultimately is, you know, how you go about doing it. But let's first talk about what it affects. So what's in the scope of information security? Well, hardware and software, maybe that's obvious, right? So the laptops that your employees bring home, if there's virus protection on those devices, and what kind of authentication procedures do you have? Which leads us to the server-based processes, all the DevOps stuff. How does your development team store and check in their code? How does change management work? How are you storing passwords, not just in-house, but also for your clients and customers? Staff procedures like the onboarding process, and just as interesting and important, the offboarding process. Like, what formally do you need to do to make sure your employees aren't walking away with an iPad or something that has customer information on it? So when you think about information security in the context of an actual business, it really affects everything, right? I think I skipped one. Yeah. So if you think about information security for any industry, and I'm not going to go through this whole slide, but you can imagine that this is something that bubbles up to the top. This is not something that we should do because it's a nice idea. It's because it really can affect the course and future of a business. You know, clearly for data protection officers, for information security officers, this is about doing their job effectively. Having a formal set of processes and controls in place to make sure they can do their job well. Clearly for the business, a lot of this can just be about reputation and also about your bona fides, about being a legitimate player competitively when you're going up against alternatives. Can you claim with authenticity that you are securing your client's information as well as your own information? So any industry can benefit from information security, obviously. For the digital signage industry, let's make this relevant to us. Why do your clients care? So if you're an enterprise, why do I think you should care? If you're selling into enterprises, why do they care? Well, look, again, you're probably thinking about, as an enterprise that is adopting a digital signage solution, independent of digital signage, you're already thinking about what are we doing internally to protect our information. You are building or already have in place internal controls. And you need to ensure that third-party platforms, third-party software respects those internal controls. And information security is a big part of that. And so it's a big part of your decision-making process when selecting a content management system. Of course, even if your digital signage CMS fails, you look like the bad guy. Your clients aren't going to blame the CMS, they're going to blame you. So this is a lot about managing trust. And of course, ultimately, if the signage industry embraces information security, it'll make your job easier in actually picking somebody to work with. If you're an agency or an integrator, so you are sort of the middleman, you're not necessarily building the CMS, but it's your job to choose one, recommend it, and install it. When you have an understanding of information security and are self-aware that the tools you're using are good at it or not, it certainly helps you differentiate from alternative companies. It should simplify pre-sales because it becomes a check mark, right? Done. We're clear. Not, a 10-page RFI of questions. Do you secure this? How do you secure that? What do you do for this, right? And it should augment your authority. It should give you, again, it should wrap you in the cloak of having knowledge, understanding, and they can trust in your ability to implement a solution that will respect those internal controls on the enterprise side. I think it should probably be obvious for a CMS provider, for a software vendor, why they should care. You got to protect the information, protect yourself against attacks, manage the risk, and make security business as usual. So I don't know that I need to sell you on this stuff. All this stuff is obviously good. It's just can be hard. And ultimately, that's probably why some of us are not there yet. It's not trivial. It's hard to do and can be a little intimidating. So, okay, we've talked about information security. What is it? Why people should care. Let's now talk about how to prove it, okay? And really, this is the core of my presentation. What do you need to think about? What can you do as an organization to either ensure your vendor is protecting your information, or as a vendor to ensure your client that the information is protected? When building these slides, it put into my mind a little bit of a kind of a parallel example. When I was in another life of mine, I spent some time learning to fly. And when you learn to fly, it's a single engine plane, and you go, okay, that's an intimidating dashboard. It exists to protect my life, you know, so I don't crash and I don't crash into somebody's home. But I get it, you know, I understand it. I think I understand now what I need to do to protect myself. And then you say, oh, wait a second. If I have to protect the lives of others and I have a really complex, no, this is what I need to know. Maybe I'm stretching it a bit, but you know, in a way, what you see on the right, that's information security. What's on the left is what we hope information security is. And I could maybe argue that in the digital signage industry, that's kind of how we approached it, right? And got away with it. But the rest of the industry and our enterprises are saying, if you want to protect the lives of my information, you need to do that. And that is so intimidating, right? Where do you even start? I still can't imagine learning that, by the way. The good news is this, is you don't have to figure that out on your own. My point is there are standards, there are things that formally exist to enable you to adopt these things in a discrete, step-by-step method that ensures you've done it right and that ensures your clients, your customers, that you've done it right. And the two primary standards are ISO 27001 and SOC2, SOC 2. These are the two recognized standards for securing information. They exist to help you learn how to fly that complicated cockpit, not just the simple one. So I'm going to spend a few minutes walking through ISO 27001 and SOC 2. I've said 27001 a million times in my life so far. So if I spit it out, my apologies. So let's talk about that first. You probably are familiar conceptually with the International Organization for Standardization. They have tons of standards that are typically globally recognized. They tend to be the gold standard. Doesn't matter what country you're in. If you've achieved ISO certification, you can pretty much trust that whatever that standard is about, it's being done properly. ISO 27001 is part of a family. It's a 27,000 family. The family broadly is about information security matters. There's over 40 different standards in the 27,000 family. 001 is specifically about an information security management system. It identifies over 144 controls and an information security management system, sort of a meta process for looking over those controls. And the controls, you know, span the gamut from physical access control, incident management, all the things you see on screen. There's a ton of controls that may or may not be relevant to your business. And so it doesn't require that you do all 144, but you define a scope. And within the scope of your certification effort, you identify the things that are relevant to you, the controls that are relevant. So it could be 144, it could be less. essentially what you do when you start the certification process is you identify what you do well, what you don't do well, and there's a very formal auditing process. There are people that exist, organizations that exist solely to audit your ability to properly adopt an information security management system according to 27001. Let's talk a little bit more about the information security management system, because that's what's unique to 27001. When we talk about SOC 2, that's going to be the big difference. As I mentioned, it's a bit of a meta process. It's looking over the controls and the guidelines. It does lots of things. It identifies the information you have to protect. It ensures there's a systematic approach to managing and protecting that information, gives you an organizational view. It ensures that arrangements exist to continually fine-tune it, to reassess and adapt to changes. That's really core to the ISMS, is to give you a bird's eye view of everything you're doing to manage your security, and to have a process in place to continually make sure it's adapting to the current environment, that it's not a static kind of thing. It adopts, in that last bullet point, you see plan, do, check, act. So plan, do, check, act, that's sort of the ISO meta process. No matter what standard you're doing, there's this general notion among all the ISO standards of planning, doing, checking, and acting. And that's even built into the ISMS itself, to continually plan, do, check, and act. And it just cycles over and over and over again. Okay? So that's really core to 27001, making sure you have an ISMS in place and that it's continually reassessing the effectiveness of your controls. If you pass your final audit, we'll talk about auditing in a bit after we discuss SOC2, SOC 2. If you pull it off, you get a certificate. You get, it's a formal audit conducted by a formal organization, making sure you conform to the 27001 requirements in the context of a particular scope. You're actually seeing on the screen the Intuiface certificate. Company is Intuilab, but Intuiface. And you can see there's a scope defined there. It's for the following activities. So for those activities, we are now certified to be compliant with the standard protecting the information. The certificate is good for 3 years, but there are annual audits. So the annual audits don't cover everything. They're sort of checking on items. There's a notion of non-conformity and suggestions for improvement in areas of concern. They have all these formal names. And if you have major non-conformities, you can't pass the audit. If you have areas of concern or suggestions for improvement, you get a pass. They're going to check up on you again to make sure that you're doing okay. So the certificate is good for 3 years, but you need to bring people in on an annual basis to make sure that you're doing all right. That's ISO 27001. Let's now talk about SOC 2, SOC 2. This is not ISO. This is not from the standards organization. This is from the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants. And you'll notice the word American in it. It is mainly recognized in North America. That's changing a little bit, because at the end of the day, as you'll see, there's so much overlap that it's starting to achieve a foothold internationally, but certainly it's primarily recognized in North America. There's actually 3 system and organization control report options. I'm listing a couple of them here. There's SOC 1, SOC 2, SOC 3. So we're talking about SOC 2 in particular, okay? And there are 2 types. There's type 1 and type 2. Type 1 is mainly about financial controls. Type 2 is about operational controls. Typically, when you see SOC 2, it's a type 2 report because it's about operational controls. And it's over an audit period. It's over a period of time. It's not what are you doing on such and such a day. It's monitoring over a period of time. How well are you implementing your controls? Now, the controls for SOC 2 are distributed across what they call 5 trust services criteria. I mentioned there were 144 controls in 27001. Relatively speaking, you're going to find the same things here. They formally subdivide them across these 5 trust services criteria, of which only one is mandatory. So if you want to achieve SOC 2 attestation. They don't call it certification, it's attestation. I'll talk about that in a moment. If you want to achieve attestation, you got to prove you have the right security controls in place. The other things are optional. And you can choose to do them or not, although depending on your business, you're going to want to do that because depending on who you're selling to, they might require that your SOC 2 attestation include confidentiality and privacy. And if you don't have it, security is insufficient. SOC 2 audits are performed by a certified public accountant. Now, they need to be trained particularly in SOC 2, but technically they're an accountant. And when they decide that, yes, you have the right controls in place, they seem to be doing what you say they're doing, then you get an attestation. There's actually a set of reports. There's a letter from the CPA. There's a letter from the company. There's a whole bunch of stuff in there. It's the CPA saying, in my opinion, such and such company has implemented the controls they say they've implemented. Okay? They say they're doing these things. There's a bunch of controls they should have. They say they're fulfilling these controls. I've looked at what they're doing. Yeah, I think it's doing that. And that you have to do annually. That's an annual thing that you need to do. So you don't get to skate, for a couple of years. Every year they got to reassess. Let's now compare these things, okay? How do they compare? So at the end of the day, the main difference is a 96% control overlap between 27001 and SOC 2. The main difference is the information security management system. And by the way, this is a little bit of religion. So I'm going to do the best I can to give my unbiased opinion, but there could be a couple other denominations that might have a different spin. But so this is the way I see it. The SOC 2 attestation is over a period of time and repeated on an annual basis. In a way, the audit is the information security management system. It is the ongoing reassessment that the controls the organization says are in place and are being effective. For 27001, information security management systems are built in. There's not the human auditing part. There's still an audit, an annual audit for 27001, but there's a formal system in place to self-audit and make sure the controls are in place. So I think that decently captures the differences between those two things. I mean, for 27001, you get a certificate. In SOC, it's an attestation. It's a letter with an opinion, but at the end of the day, conceptually kind of the same thing. Typically, there are cost and timeline differences, though. The ISMS overlay, there's a lot more documentation work that needs to happen. The audits take longer. And so by and large, 27001 tends to cost more and take longer. Okay. I'll briefly talk about us. It took us 15 months. It took us 15 months to be certified, and we were told was pretty good. Okay. GDPR. Some of you might be familiar with the General Data Protection Regulation. It's sort of the gold standard for protecting customer information. You are seeing things like California, and I took a note here. What do they call it? They call it the California Consumer Privacy Act. It's a state level thing that kind of does the same thing. So GDPR is the gold standard. It's kind of branching out. It's a big one, and it's all about data protection, right? So how does this overlap with 27001 and SOC 2? Well, basically, some of the controls are there and some of them are not. So for things like consent and data portability, they're not really baked into 27001 or SOC 2. However, based on our experience, the 27001 auditor asked, will you be working with data provided by Europe-based clients? And if the answer is yes, then we have to be GDPR compliant as well. So it wasn't baked into 27001, but it was required by the audit, okay? From what I've seen with SOC 2, again, it's sort of the same overlay. If you're not operating in Europe, you don't have to worry about it. If you're just in North America, if you're going to operate in Europe, you kind of have to do GDPR anyway. So maybe like 27001, it's something you might have to account for. I just know that when we were audited, we had to be GDPR compliant in order to be 27001 certified. Don't know if it's required to get your SOC 2 attestation report. Quickly looking at our certification experience, as I mentioned, it took us 15 months. The first 3 months was sort of the initial risk assessment. Throughout the process, we had a coach from an information security certified consulting firm. This is what they do for a living, is help organizations manage their approach towards 27001 certification. And they did tell us 15 months was kind of quick. So, take that for what it's worth. We decided the scope of our effort should impact any part of our business that affects information, data that is either provided by our customers or delivered to our customers. So the scope of our certification included product development, operations, and support. It did not include sales, marketing, and accounting. We could have chosen to do it, and heaven knows we want to protect our accounting information too. It just wasn't in the scope of the certification, because at the end of the day, we didn't think it was relevant to satisfy an enterprise's needs for ensuring that we're protecting their information. So that's what we did. There were a bunch of internal audits that are repeated over and over again, and official audits as well. Remember, as I said, although the certificate is good for 3 years, there is an annual audit to make sure everything is A-OK. So that tends to repeat. At the end of the day, 20 new policies were defined. 22 guidelines were created in addition to 30 existing guidelines, so 52 guidelines. 28 controls were defined and they're regularly checked on a monthly basis. It costs us 2 full-time equivalents, 2 full-time employees for certification, and it takes 1 full-time employee for ongoing maintenance. So there's some investment here of time and money and people. I mean, it's there, but we're very glad we did it. Now, according to the auditor, we had some things that helped us become certified. Our executives were already involved. A requirement of 001 is that the executives are involved, that they're on board. And they're already there, so that's good. That was solved. We were already digitizing everything. We use Atlassian to manage internal docs and Jira to manage the tickets. And there really wasn't a lot of paper going back and forth, and that made it much easier to transition to formal processes that we didn't already have. And we did have a culture of agility. We have a small business mindset. If we need to change something, we change it. We're not the Titanic. We can pivot. And that made it easy to do continuous improvement and to modify existing controls and adopt new processes. And it was in our favor for that. And we've seen lots of benefits. So first of all, information security is now part of the DNA. It's built into the company. It does mean we can go after larger enterprises who have stringent requirements. And again, the nutshell is instead of answering a 10-page RFI, it's a checkbox about being certified. It makes it a lot easier, and it gives comfort to the enterprises looking at us saying, got it, we don't even have to worry about that. We have adopted security by design development principles, so all new development anticipates information security requirements rather than reacting. We're being proactive, and certainly it strengthened our intellectual property protection. Organizationally, we saw some benefits too. We didn't plan on COVID, but by preparing for certification, it made it fairly easy for us to transition to a secure work from home environment. We had all the processes in place, the onboarding and the hardware distribution. It was all kind of already there, and it made it easier for us to make that move. And it does help organizational productivity. When everything is clearly defined and this processes in place, I used to work at IBM. There's a zillion processes and a matrix system of 50 levels, hard to be agile. But if you have a smart, well-honed process in place, it does make it easier to do things because you don't have to wonder what's the right thing or should we do that. No. We have a very clear set of processes and steps and guidelines, and now we know. And so it makes it easier to adopt tools. We know what to look for and who can do what and how to build things. So there have absolutely been benefits. It took a long time to get there, but we're glad we did it. So let me wrap things up by highlighting the importance of information security. Maybe now I'm preaching to the choir, I hope so, and just a little bit about next steps. If you're an enterprise organization, if your IT organization is deploying digital signage, you're on the end. You have seen that a broad trend in the industry is to ensure that signage is aware of its users and its surroundings. In other words, it's not traditional broadcast digital signage, it's interactive signage of some kind. Maybe it's just a camera identifying age and gender. That's still an interaction, right? That's the trend, to make it more relevant in real time for an individual. It needs to be intelligent, it needs to be aware. And the only way you can do that ultimately is to somehow incorporate information you're managing in the back office to make it relevant. It could just be, the price of a shirt, because in retail, but somehow to react in real time to provide the signage solution access to the back office while at the same time protecting that information, right? If you're not already thinking about information security, that's why you need to think about it, because the more you make your deployments aware of the user and customized for the user, the more you need to open up the back office, the more you're exposing the back office to the signage platform. You need to think about information security. So what can you do? Well, clearly, ideally, you're finding a platform that's certified, right? That would be the best, because you get the SOC2 report, or you look at the certificate, the 27001 certificate, and you go, got it, don't have to worry about it. If they don't have it, you can still work with it, but now you need to say, how do you do this? How do you do this? How do you do this? To make sure that your infrastructure is respected. It should make your evaluations easier. If you bias yourself to the standards and then you just look for the check mark, that's a pretty easy way to evaluate, right? But you don't have to insist on the standards. You don't have to insist on that. But at the very least, you want to take responsibility for asking the right questions to make sure that you don't have to worry. If you're on the other side, you're a digital signage integrator, for the CMS providers, either you do it or you're prepared to answer the questions, right? But for the integrator, you can't control that. You cannot control what your vendors are providing you. You can only react to it and make sensible decisions. Certainly, you recognize, I hope, that you're accessing, manipulating, displaying, collecting, writing information. A lot of what you're doing in signage, particularly as you progress to some kind of interactive signage, you're touching information. And your clients are worried about that right now. Internally, independent of digital signage, they're thinking about information security all the time. You have to think about it too. You just don't have a choice. And if they're not asking for it yet, it's coming. So you need to prepare for those requests. At the very least, you need to become somewhat fluent in the language of information security and be prepared to provide satisfactory answers to the RFIs. You could push your CMS vendors to certify. They can certainly do that as well. Ultimately, it's either picking a platform or spending resources on either for your homegrown CMS, or at least being prepared to answer those questions. You can't skirt the responsibility. It's not going away. As I said way at the beginning, in any other industry, they're already doing this. I mean, we're kind of the last bastion that doesn't really formally talk about it too much, and we have no choice. The train is coming through the tunnel. I cannot imagine you need any more motivation. I hope not. But keep this in mind. If you have, certainly we're biased with the ISO certification. I could have written SOC2 here as well. If it's in place, it makes you a trusted partner. It does make it easier for you to win new business, to retain customers, because you've invested in your ability to satisfy their requirements. It's sort of public evidence of the efforts you're taking to take care of them. Certainly, it minimizes risk, loss of reputation, fines. Nobody wants these things. That's pretty clear. Because you are self-assessing, it makes your own business healthier, improving those business critical processes and strategies, strengthening your own organization, which is always a good idea. We don't always want to look in the mirror because we're not going to be happy with what we see. At least we have some standard approaches that enable you to look with an intelligent and impassionate eye and make changes. And certainly it makes it easier for you to comply with commercial, contractual, legal responsibilities, even things like GDPR. Yes, some of the things aren't covered, but if you have a SOC 2 attestation, if you're ISO certified, you're very close to it. I mean, you've progressed a lot. They're not built in, but you're pretty close. It doesn't become a difficult valley to jump. That's my webinar. I hope you found that helpful, informative, interesting. And what I'd like to do, Bradley, I hope we have some questions. We'll see if we have any questions. And we'll go from there. But for those of you on the webinar, it's that questions panel in your Zoom toolbar. You can type them in there and we'll see them. We'll see if we have any questions now.
Yes, we do have a few. So our first question today is, have you come across opportunities that required ISO certification or SOC2 attestation, or just has it been just something nice to have?
We have seen it. I don't remember the timing. Certainly, we've had 10-page RFIs for years about security. When we work with organizations like Microsoft now, they're asking about this. So absolutely, we're seeing it. It certainly depends on the organization. It depends on how they run the rest of their business. For small and mid-size opportunities, you're not always seeing it. I suspect part of it, again, is they're intimidated by the whole concept as well. But for large enterprise, we have absolutely seen it. And certainly what we've been able to do is receive the 10-pager, provide the certificate, and we're done. So for me, that's not a nice to have. That's a must have because it vastly simplified the pre-sales process for us and gave them some confidence as well. A good question.
Awesome. So our next question is, can you give us a couple of examples of things you've implemented through your ISO certification process that visibly and directly impacted your customers?
That's a good question. Yes, it's certainly true that most of the controls are internal. That's why the certificate is important, because it's proof that you're doing things that people can't see, right? That's why you get the certificate or the report. But there are some results. So for example, one of the things we implemented was a web accessible page dynamically showing the availability of our systems, of all the infrastructure our software depends on. You can see, is it up? Anybody ever use is up? You know, that little website, is it up? So we have a cloud status monitoring website. So people can see, are the varied licensing server, all these things, are they up and available? If they're down, are we actively trying to do something about it? What is the status of this activity? And people can see it. They can even subscribe to it. So they'll get, you can do an email or things like this. You can know that we're on top of issues and can pursue it. And also there was another one. Right. So this sounds kind of stupid, but you know, when people wanted to change, we have a notion of accounts in Intuiface. And there's a particular email address associated with that account. And if you wanted to change that account email address, we didn't have a formal process for it. It was formal but loose. It was, you talk to this person and this person did this, and all so that we could make sure it's a legitimate request, not just some random person saying, can I have access to that account instead? So we created a formal process using an informal approach. And we now have a very simple, streamlined process. It was just exposed to us going through the certification process. We needed to do a better job. And so if any of our customers need to change account ownership, there's a very simple formal process in place that people can follow. So those are a couple examples of things that kind of bubbled up to the client level. Good question.
Excellent. So our next question is, as an enterprise user, should I be more worried about the CMS having the right infrastructure and the certification for information security, or that the integrator that represents the CMS? Is it equally important?
So this question is about, it's coming from, I have to presume, from an enterprise user.
Yes.
You have to take some responsibility here. You cannot ultimately certify the integrator. What you can do is have a set of questions, read their questions, talk to them about it, and assess if you believe that is sufficient to allay your concerns. The integrator typically is inheriting the infrastructure. Typically, they're not creating the CMS. They've made a choice. They're going to install it in management, but it's not their infrastructure to some extent. Depends on the CMS, but to some extent. So you need to make sure the integrator is fluent in information security, is qualified to understand the requirements of a well-built information security management system, and then evaluate the answers they provide. This is the way it's been done for years. So I am actually not suggesting something that can't be done. Let's be honest, with very rare exceptions, the CMSs out there are not currently certified, right? And so you've been doing this anyway, is you've been talking to the integrator, if not working with the CMS provider directly, asking questions and judging the quality of the answers. And you can continue to do that, right? But since you can't certify the integrator, you need to make sure you trust them, that you believe they understand how important this is. They understand the nuances of security, and they're giving you answers that make sense. Obviously, it would be much easier if the CMS was just certified, then I'm not going to say the integrator could be ignorant of it, but they're inheriting the benefits of a certified platform. So you can take either approach, just one requires more work on your part to be comfortable with the end result.
Excellent. So our next question is, you mentioned GDPR, but what about CCPA and other regulations coming down the line? Does ISO 27001 or SOC2 also comply with CCPA or others coming down the tracks?
Yeah, I touched on CCPA a little bit. It's essentially, that's why I was considering GDPR sort of the gold standard, because CCPA is certainly inspired by it. Would presume there are nuanced differences, but certainly inspired. As with GDPR, I would say there is significant overlap, but it is not complete. Being 27001 certified doesn't, by definition, mean you are also CCPA compliant, GDPR compliant, but it takes you a long way there. Further, at least in our experience, we were told if you want ISO certification, you need to be GDPR certified as well. You can't ignore that piece. So they sort of imposed it on us. Having the controls in place for ISO meant we were, 80% of the way there. I don't know what the percentage was, but so it would not be fair to say that ISO or SOC 2 are going to automatically give you CCPA, give you GDPR, maybe other standards coming out of the pike. It doesn't, but it gets you a long way there. So you're 20 feet away instead of 100. Okay.
Awesome, thank you. So I've seen a few questions coming in regards to whether this webinar will be available afterwards, and it will. We will post it on Digital Signage today for anyone who arrived late and might have missed a bit of the beginning. So with that in mind, I want to do a last call for any questions before we sign off today.
I hope this was sunshine.
I believe it was. Well, if there are no more questions, I would like to thank Jeffrey for giving us this really fascinating presentation. It was really enlightening and really an area that not many people are discussing. So thank you so much, Jeffrey.
It's my pleasure. Glad to be here. Thank you, Bradley.
Thank you. And we want to wish everyone a good afternoon. Take care.